2017, that was the tipping point with the New York Times article. I feel like that was really the first shoe drop within ufology in terms of steering us into more like a warlike threat narrative, an attack narrative, a trauma narrative. Over time, that hasn't worked out well for them. How can we hook the human into being interested in our narrative? I think that the ufology, the intel military ufology, felt they needed to take another tack, that the threat narrative wasn't working and they needed to have another narrative. It was a pivot. Psionics is a pivot to reclaim really a failed op.
Right now on Higher Journeys with Alexis Brooks. Welcome everyone to Higher Journeys. I'm your host, Alexis Brooks. So delighted to be back with you today. If you've been watching the channel, if you've been listening or watching to our last couple of episodes, we've gone kind of deep into a word that has found its way into the zeitgeist, I would say, not necessarily of the masses, but in this field we call ufology. There's a term that's been used, it's being used, called psionics. Have you heard of it? I can't stop talking about it because it I think it's opening up, let's just say, a proverbial can of worms of discussion. Now, just to refresh, if you don't know, and I know probably a lot of you do, it was a gentleman by the name of Jake Barber, a self-professed UFO whistleblower that came forward about a couple of months ago, did a show with Ross Coulthart of News Nation, where he was the one to really introduce the term and talk about what it entails. And so, as it were, the conversation around what psionics is, what it isn't, how long it's been around, all of that stuff has been talked about at great length since he brought it up. I happen to know that psionics is a term that's been around a long time, and so does my guest, who I'm going to introduce to you shortly. But I want to bring you up to speed real quick, y'all. There was a summit, a psionics summit that happened about, I want to say about 3 weeks ago. It was toward the end of February. It was hosted by a Dr. Jim Garrett. There were a panel of roughly 8 or 9 thinkers, you might say, in this field of ufology, ranging from PhDs to consciousness researchers to experiencers. And the whole premise of the conversation was about what their idea of what psionics is and how it's being used. And there were some ethical issues that came up. That wasn't necessarily a big part of it, but it certainly was part of the conversation. But nonetheless, the conversation is gaining steam. And so I thought I would continue it today with my first-time guest, who I'm going to put on the screen right now. Her name is Dr. Rebecca Hardcastle Wright. And she is here to talk about, I'm going to say, quite a provocative thesis that she's brought forward since that particular summit that she has titled, it's a Substack that, of course, I'm going to link for you, called Why Psionics, Why Now? And that's the nature of the conversation we're going to have today. So let me welcome Dr. Wright, Dr. Hardcastle Wright. Thank you so much for finally coming to Higher Journeys, my friend.
Hello to everyone, and thank you. Thank you for having me.
You've been around a long time, my friend, and I mean that as an utmost compliment, not because you still look young, but you've been in this game for a long time. And you and I were talking offline, and you really went deep into some things that I was not aware of, not just about psionics, of course, but around this entire idea of consciousness, exoconsciousness. I want you to really get into what that is for audience members that may not know. But you found yourself in a lot of circles and have gotten a lot of insight from people off the record as to the long game about what may be happening. And this article that you wrote about psionics is going to lead us down that road eventually. But here's where I want to start. For those that do not know, what is exoconsciousness? A name, by the way, or a term that Dr. Hardcastle Wright coined how many years ago was this?
Since 2005, 20 years ago.
Oh my gosh. Tell us what exoconsciousness is, how you define it.
I'll give a little bit of background because it makes the term more understandable. So I'm a childhood experiencer. I'm a childhood experiencer of multidimensional beings as well as extraterrestrial beings. And I lived with this mostly on my own, trying to figure out what was going on. And then in 1997, I moved to a little town outside of Phoenix called Fountain Hills, Arizona. And for the first time in my life, I was with an ET experiencer group of adults And I was able to actually share what had happened to me with this group. And I'm the leader of the group was Dr. Ruth Hover, and she was working with John Mack in John Mack's peer group, John Mack, Leo Sprinkle. So she became my mentor. And as it were, I was a single mom at the time, raising 3 kids, and she had this library that was like 3 books deep. So she shared her library with me. I went to our monthly extraterrestrial experiencer gatherings. And at that time, what had happened in my childhood began to, I would use the word inflate in my adulthood in Fountain Hills. So I was having a lot of experiences that were mirroring what I went through in childhood, but there was an adult depth and dimension to them that I did not have as a child.
Sure.
So that's where I was. There was just a lot of activity in my home. I was around a lot of different experiencers. Remember, 97 was when the Phoenix lights hit. So people in Phoenix it was like a mecca for ufology at that time. And in 2005, I decided, well, I'm going to go to the community college here, Scottsdale Community College, and I'm going to teach extraterrestrial reality about UFOs, history of UFOs. And I did. And it was one of the first UFO classes in the nation. Wow. So at that time, there were like 2 or 3 of us, Aaron Clark up in Ohio, myself in Phoenix, a woman in the UK was also teaching, but that was it. I mean, I really believed that by 2010, there was going to be UFO classes in every university in the nation. And I had been previous to moving to Fountain Hills, I'd been in the academics. I'd been at Wright State University in Dayton, and I had worked also at a community college. So I taught, I was used to the kind of the academic. I knew how to put a course proposal together, a curriculum proposal together. So I wasn't really surprised that it got accepted, but only for a semester, and then it was shut down. Someone wrote a letter to the president and they shut it down. But I did feel the class, which was amazing. That's another story. But during that 2005 high activity, teaching the class at the college class on extraterrestrial reality, one morning, my alarm went off and I had to get up. I had to go to work. I had to get my kids ready for school. I had to pack lunches, the whole routine. So I remember distinctly rolling over, hitting that radio alarm snooze button. They used to have it, like you can snooze for 5 minutes with your radio alarm, which was somebody on the radio was yelling, "It's 6 o'clock, get up." And so, I hated that. So I hit the snooze button. And I fell back. I was a tired single mom. I'll just put it bluntly. I was tired.
Sure.
And I was stressed out a lot. And my head hit that pillow. And the word exoconsciousness came in my body. It didn't come in my head like a download. It saturated my entire body. And I knew at that point, a lot of things had come into a confluence to make that happen. And I knew at that point that was going to be my life's work, was this word and what it meant. Because, of course, at that point, being an experiencer, I was already digging deep into like what was going on with mind control. What was going to MK Ultra? Who are these other experiencers? What did John Mack know? What did the other experiencers in the peer groups know? What was going on? And so today we have a community, and we define exoconsciousness as the innate human ability to connect, communicate, and co-create with extraterrestrials, multidimensionals, and importantly, spiritual beings. So we really cover the whole spectrum of having contact. And many people that come in our group are religious contacts, actually.
Okay. Thank you for that. And I'm glad we led up to the bottom line, what exoconsciousness is. Well, I look at it as, and of course, we're going to be talking about this sort of juxtaposed to this idea or this new term called psionics, as a more organic, not more, but an organic approach to making that connection with otherworldly, other dimensional intelligences. And of course, part of the article, which I want to get into as soon as possible, the argument of that versus perhaps a more synthetic or steered entry into a larger consciousness framework where these communications may be taking place. I think that might be the crux of your article. So why don't we get to that? Let's just go to the article. Why psionics? Why now? And by the way, this is going to be a 4-part. Is it going to be a 4-part?
4-part series.
Series. Wow. Well, y'all, and of course we'll link it. The article goes into rich depth. Let's start at the end. And I'm going to go ahead and just put it out there, you guys. We've talked about this idea of transhumanism in the past. It's not a secret. The idea that Homo sapiens sapien can be made better by virtue of some sort of entry of technology, really technocracy, to make human not really Homo sapiens sapien anymore, but a mutated version that would be part of cyber, let's just say. A lot of people don't think that's a good thing. There are many people that are proponents of it. I'm going to err on the side of the former. But what you did in this article, I'm going to cut to the chase and have you kind of make the case, is that it could be that the term, not just the term, but what denotes psionics, as some have explained, may be a spoke in the wheel of getting us toward a more transhumanist reality. Am I right with that, or am I oversimplifying?
Absolutely. I would say, as you use that word, being steered in that direction is what psionics is doing. So psionics is applying the principles of electronics and engineering to psychic abilities. So extrasensory perception, ESP, telepathy, psychokinesis. So they're applying engineering electronic principles to that. So right away, just those 2 words. And then as Jake Barber used the word, just to quote him at the beginning of his talk at the Psionics Summit with Jim Garrison, he said, it's kind of a fun word. You can play with this thing, back to gaming. It's digital intelligence or digital consciousness. I mean, he lays it right out there.
I watched this 3-hour summit. As I think I mentioned before, I will link it. It is quite good because there's a diverse range of voices. But this particular article that you wrote, Rebecca, really kind of focuses in on the inferences that are made by Jake Barber. And I noticed one thing. I actually listened to his piece, not that long, it's only about 10 minutes, a couple of times. And what I blatantly saw, good, bad, or indifferent, is he uses a constant analogy of the field of consciousness. I think he calls it the World Wide Web. Now, we've used these analogies before, inner Wi-Fi. I've used the term myself. But I will say, in support of what you're saying, that at one point in this talk, he went from saying, using this as an analogy, and then corrected himself. And he says, this may really be how it works. So, okay, Jake Barber is not here to defend himself, but we do want to have this conversation. And it's not all on Jake Barber. It's about what is this? Why is this term now being
He was a messenger.
brought in? You believe so?
Okay. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. He was to give a little bit of background, I would say 2017, that was the tipping point with the New York Times article when it came out and began to frame through military intelligence, ufology, and you've been in ufology for a long time also, began to frame it as a threat narrative. And I don't know how you felt about it, but I saw a majority of my colleagues moving into, I want to align with intel. I want to align with military because I'm going to get some kind of insider information, or I'm going to get a television show, or I'm going to get some kind of payoff here with this. And I feel like that was really the first shoe drop within ufology in terms of steering us into more like a warlike threat narrative, an attack narrative, a trauma narrative. And I think that over time, that hasn't worked out well for them. That's just my opinion. I think a lot of it falls apart. A lot of the images that are shared, that's not really, a UFO. That's really chandelier on the ceiling. The Tic Tac was an old video. Jake Barber's egg video that he's picking up this egg with a helicopter, and he's supposed to be a mechanic, and it's just and that was denied. Just a lot of game playing toward trying to hook. How can we hook the human into being interested in our narrative? And so my take on it is, when Trump went into office, John Ratcliffe was put in charge of the CIA, and nobody really talks about that. John Ratcliffe it wasn't like Kash Patel. There was no pushback about John Ratcliffe. He just went right in. Head of CIA. I bet most people, if you ask today, who's the head of CIA? They don't know.
Wouldn't know the name, yeah.
Who would know? Who's John Ratcliffe? He's a freaking senator. And so what happened when Ratcliffe went in, that was a real left turn for ufology. Because I don't know if your listeners follow Mike Benz. Please do, on X, Mike Benz, Benz. He has put together an enormous encyclopedia of CIA cutouts, the biggest of which was USAID. Mm-hmm. So when USAID was taken down, that was a takedown, really, of the CIA. But nobody frames it like that, but that's what it was. I mean, one of the things, I lived 6 years in Washington, D.C., and one of the things you learn in Washington, D.C. is if you meet somebody and they tell you, I work for the treasurer, I work for state, chances are they work for the CIA. It's not a cut and dried job description, or it's not a cut and dried pay. People move. It's very fluid. People are moved around on different CIA intelligence.
Absolutely. Well, let's take the media. Let's be
Project
clear.
Mockingbird. Absolutely.
But I came from mainstream media, and I'll say for the record, I worked with a newsman, as quiet as it was kept, who ended up being CIA. And it was told to me when I realized he was missing so much. And I pulled one of the sidekicks from the morning show aside, and I said, hey, Chris, what's up with, I'm not going to mention the person's name. Why hasn't he been here? And he said, Alexis, come here for a second. That's why. Okay. So we know that they are, in fact, ubiquitous across many industry sectors. Okay. Go ahead. Continue.
And so really what hasn't been talked about is when USAID funding was pulled, which directly impacted CIA funding. It just does. I think that the ufology, the intel military ufology, felt they needed to take another tact, that the threat narrative wasn't working. Trump wasn't really interested in having any more wars, and they needed to have another narrative. And so in comes Jake Barber and Psionics. So it was a pivot. Psionics is a pivot to reclaim really a failed op.
Hey, everyone. Just a quick reminder, if you're enjoying this content and you want more, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell. This tells YouTube you want to see more Higher Journeys, and that helps spread the word. It's one of the best ways you can support our work. Thanks so much. Now, let's get back to the show. That I don't know that you alluded to in your article.
I didn't.
I think that's very key. And again, I'm just going to hear you out here, and I know everybody has a right to their, and I'm talking to the audience opinion. Look, this is a complex. The whole matter
it's all complex.
So complex, not cut and dry. It could be both in terms of the motivation. It could be equally both. Everybody knows my favorite quote is, the test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. And I think this could be one of those conundrums and paradoxes and all that good stuff. But I hear what you're saying. Let's go to, I want to see if I can find, because I actually really listened to what Jake had to say in this particular venue with great interest, knowing that I would be speaking with you, and how he describes, let me see if I can find this. He says, he describes psionics as, quote, a person with a predisposition for extratemporal abilities and sensitives, aka psychic powers. We just talked about this. I mean, look, save for the fact that there's this digital framework or conduit, maybe you could call it, that brings you fully into this to this space. as it relates to connecting with UAP craft. This is where he talks about the technology kind of coming in, right? It's not necessarily connecting. I'm kind of cutting in here because there's so many different pieces to this, but with regard to the individuals that have been brought in, as he describes it, to connect with the UAP and NHI, right? UAP, NHI, relatively new terms. They may be not only just connecting with the intelligence as we think of it, but the craft itself, and in some cases, piloting the craft. This is where the technology aspect comes in. Give me your thoughts on all of that. It's a huge one.
Well, as an experiencer in childhood who actually had, there are many people like me, I'm not just me, but many of us, many experiencers had an experience of piloting craft, had an experience that the craft was alive, that your consciousness and the craft consciousness merged.
Agreed. Yes.
So that's really one of the main themes that led me into exoconsciousness. So I've always researched not the craft. So for example, the Phoenix Lights happened in 1997. I didn't see it. I knew all these people who were UFO fans in 97. Not one of them called me on the phone. I didn't have any feeling about it. I didn't see it. And part of me is like, what the heck just happened? But I didn't see it because, Alexis, I wasn't supposed to see it. I was supposed to be a consciousness researcher. Had I seen that craft, I know I would have gone in a totally different direction.
Oh, wow. Okay. Sure.
Than where I am today.
Sure.
And I think one of the things we're looking at, I'll just mention as in our community of exoconscious, is that we're looking at plasma. Like, what's plasma? Plasma's conscious. Plasma has intelligence. Well, if you're going to create a plasma technology, a plasma craft, which probably was what I was experiencing as a child, then you want to be able to fly that craft or move that craft wherever you want it to go. And you certainly don't want human consciousness shutting it down and affecting it. That's the biggest threat. Our human consciousness, with these new exotic technologies coming out, the threat is our human consciousness. It's not the threat of the UFOs. It's the threat of us. So we've been inverted, I would say. That's an inversion. So the inversion is the UFOs are going to attack you, when the real fear is we're going to attack the UFOs.
Right.
Or we're going to attack your weapons and not let them go off and,
absolutely.
Well, that's
been brought up before for sure, in terms of, who's the real threat here. And then certainly with the idea that in some history books, where it said that some of the beings, maybe doing it now, attempting to shut down nuclear power sites, they're concerned about the damage that we could do, the threat that we pose, as opposed to what they pose. And again, then we can get into which they, because as I have said, and I'm hearing more people talk about this, which is great, a spectrum of intelligences with all sorts of motivations, and maybe some with none at all. So, okay, here's a name I wanted to bring.
I just like to say the reason that Jake Barber brought forth digital consciousness, digital intelligence, psionics as an electronic field, an electronic platform, is because that is one way that you could use to control. You could use electronics to control.
We're going to get into a dialogue I had, speaking of electronics, with ChatGPT. But Rebecca, I think you're going to be in the audience as well. Maybe a little bit surprised at what GPT had to say. But before we do that, I want to go back to your article, which is fabulous. Let's talk about, you went into some history as to the history of this word. This is a word, by the way, I did look it up in my old, yes, I use real books. I'm sure a lot of you out there do too. Humongous Webster dictionary from many years ago. I said, let me see if that.
I love it.
It's not in there. I wanted to make sure whether it was or not. However, The term was coined back in the 50s by a Mr. John Campbell.
The
Tell us about
30s.
that man.
Yeah,
The
he came from the
30s?
30s. Yeah, I
Oh,
think.
okay.
Yeah, science fiction author. So
Right.
a lot of transhumanism was so science fiction was foundational in transhumanism.
Okay.
So the concepts, the ideas, the theories, the science, all of that was sort of envisioned through science fiction. And many science, not, there's some prominent science fiction authors who were intelligence agents
Hmm.
and were, enlisted into the ranks, just like, if you're a gifted inventor, you come into the ranks. So John W. Campbell was the science fiction author that really coined that word, psionics, and began to use it. And I'm a therapist, so I was very interested about his childhood,
I
which
was going to
was
say, talk about his background because that leads us into
really
another
quite,
one.
really quite
Yeah.
sad. So his father was a materialist, I would say, very scientific. Everything was logical, clean, sparse. The mother was hysterical. And I guess during his childhood, they would fight to the death. So she would be emotional and needy, and he would be avoidant and not there for John at all. And she would be actually, she had a twin sister
Hmm.
who looked just like her, and they would play tricks on John when he would
Yeah.
come home from school. And he didn't know if it was his mom or his mom's twins. I read that. Being a mom, I'm like, oh,
Yeah. That's
I
kind of
can't
cruel.
imagine the cruelty
Mm.
of a mother to think that she would do this to her child to confuse them. And then, I've done a lot of work with mind control and military mnemonics, how that's used for mind control. And right away, I was relating it to that military word called VUCA,
VUCA.
VUCA.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah. Let's go into VUCA. You're, this is perfect. I
Yeah.
want to just to level set so the audience knows where we're going. So John Campbell is the one that coined the term psionics. He clearly came from a very, well,
Dysfunctional.
volatile,
Yes. Volatile.
uncertain, complex, and ambiguous background, hence the VUCA.
Okay.
But let's make this point, because this is what the point you were making in the article. Interesting, like that this kind of a personality with this kind of a psychological profile would come up with the term psionics. There was clearly, it wasn't a fun term. It wasn't brought up in a fun context, and it wasn't to be played with, right? Let's talk about VOCA, the acronym VOCA, which is a military term, and how you connected that to John Campbell.
Well, if you look at the history of mind control, it's not really surprising that he came up with this in the era that he did, because if you go back to Tavistock and World War One, so World War One, an aspect of World War One was chemical biological warfare on people in trenches with excrement and mud and death and
Mm.
odors and every sensory thing you could think of. And these traumatized veterans were being experimented on. How did they react to trauma? What was their response? How could their human behavior be controlled through trauma? And
Mm.
that was then moved into the Tavistock Institute, which came to America then. It was at the UK originally, came to America, and then that went into the Macy conferences. Margaret Mead was part of that. How do we control human behavior?
Mhm.
So when the wall came down and the USSR was broken apart, the United States had one enemy. So the one enemy was Russia. So we were in a bipolar world. So these United States and Russia were the two dominant powers. When that was broken down, the United States went into a multipolar world. So they had many enemies, not one. So one of the concepts of many, I'm sure, that they came up with was VUCA. So as you so well said it, it's vulnerability, uncertainty, complexity. Everything is so complex. I'm overwhelmed with it. And ambiguity. Oh, it's so ambiguous. I mean, it's like a mystery, isn't it, Alexis? It's a mystery.
Yeah, we
And
live in a VUCA world.
we live in a VUCA
Sure.
world. And
Yeah.
and the military did that. And I don't know if your listeners remember the Hearts and Minds program of Vietnam. I mean, that's where a lot of these ideas of how do we capture the enemy's heart and mind? How do we influence their human behavior? How do we steer them into our way of seeing life? And really, the Macy Foundation's work and the work of Tavistock was really about cybernetics. So if you look at computers, Germany had a second generation computer. I mean, that's how they pulled off all these scientific experiments, because they had the data machine to do it with.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where cybernetics was involved, zeros and ones. Well, anything in a cybernetics situation where you put humans into an electronic or an engineered field, that's going to be a cybernetic field made of zeros and ones. So it's a closed loop.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So transhumanism, AI, is a closed loop. It's not really about the field of consciousness. It's about, I'm going to keep your thinking and your profile and you as a token in this closed loop. And I'm going to steer you in the direction that I want you to go for either political power, monetary ends, diplomatic ends, international diplomatic ends. You're going to be steered. So cybernetics, really, the word means steered. You're going to be steered.
Right. And
Humans
so what you're saying, Rebecca, is that psionics has a cybernetic aspect?
Absolutely. Well, anything that's digital, and I mean, Jake Barber comes out and says it's digital consciousness. It's digital intelligence. It's AI. He's saying AI. Then you're looking at something that has a cybernetics aspect. The thing about AI and cybernetics, if you think about a closed loop, and I'm a therapist, so I see a lot of this in therapy. People will get caught up in triangulated relationships. They also get caught up in kind of this, like this poor little boy, John Campbell, and his mother. Like, what's real? Who's my mother? I don't know. I'm always in this confused state. When you're in a closed loop, you're captured. It's, many people call it the control grid. That's
Right.
the control grid, is the zeros and ones. But the interesting thing about AI is that it's kind of like it's kind of like a financial game, because it always needs to have more information coming in from more places.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to go out and scrape more information. Like, what are humans doing now? What are these groups doing now?
Yeah,
it's like kind of like a Ponzi scheme. So
right. I mean, that's what ChatGPT is doing. It's a language model, learning model.
It's a Ponzi scheme. So, and we're the Ponzi's. We're the ones giving over and divulging our information into the system, because that's why they're so praying that AGI works, because they're praying that artificial intelligence becomes conscious, because they need a new Ponzi, and they'll make their own Ponzi.
Oh, wow. There's some scary implications there. And yet, as I said earlier, I think that some of the things, at least that were talked about in the summit, above and beyond what Mr. Barber had to say, were promising for other reasons having to do with the field of ufology. And finally, the consciousness conversation is becoming more. We're not these diametrically opposed camps within ufology. So I want to bring that up too, because that's also important.
Mm-hmm.
But we've got to be very cautious and very discerning and following your thesis and seeing for yourself, everyone, if you're kind of getting that same idea. Let me speaking of ChatGPT, because I do use it. It's been very helpful, and it's great to test when we're having these conversations, let's see how much it actually knows, or let's see if it's influenced by anything that would otherwise not want us to know what might be going on. And it was really the latter that got me wanting to do this. So I basically, everyone, I decided to have a little conversation with GPT, and I really wanted to do sort of a contrasting comparison between exoconsciousness and psionics, because there are common denominators, but there's a very clear distinction as well in terms of, let's just say, organic and synthetic, if we want to just really, really break it down. Exoconsciousness being a more organic touch point into the wider field of consciousness, where psionics, and it is defined this way actually, as a digital interface into the field of consciousness. There is a difference. And so I want to show you some slides, you guys. So bear with us. I'm going to put this up here and then I'm going to read, because I don't know if you'll be able to see. Let me add this to the stage. So basically, I was in this conversation with GPT. Can you see that, Rebecca?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm going to read it though. And we were talking about, I brought up VUCA and I asked, do you understand? Do you know what the militarized term VUCA means? And it said unequivocally yes, and went on to explain. And so we're in this conversation. I'm bringing you in kind of midpoint where I say to GPT, GPT says to me, because we were having this conversation about exoconsciousness and psionics, and it asks me, are you thinking about how VUCA applies to exoconsciousness, psi research, or government secrecy? It says there's definitely a connection. Aha. So here's what it says, and I'm going to bear with us because this is important. It says VUCA and exoconsciousness/psionics connection. Government and military interest in exoconsciousness, human ET contact, and psionics aligns with a VUCA world. For instance, volatility, the rapid emergence of ET, UAP disclosure, and consciousness studies disrupts established worldviews. Okay. Uncertainty. Governments may struggle with how to frame psi abilities and extraterrestrial contact, keeping information classified. Complexity, the intertwining of intelligence operations, consciousness research, and ET phenomena makes it difficult to separate fact from controlled narratives. And ambiguity, the blurred lines between science, spirituality, and military applications create confusion about the true nature of human potential and non-human intelligence. I found that interesting. So in short, it said, exoconsciousness challenges the VUCA paradigm. Exoconsciousness challenges the VUCA paradigm. It offers an evolutionary path to navigate the unknown, while psionics is often militarized to control it. Let me stop there and have you comment on that. That's what GPT came back to me and said, Rebecca.
It's great. Interesting.
Right.
Well, that's bottom line. We are, the Institute for Exoconsciousness is actually the first post-disclosure organization. So we're post-disclosure. So we're all experiencers. We don't need disclosure. We are living in a post-disclosure world. So we're an organization, post-disclosure organization, to support co-creation between natural humans, as ChatGPT just said, and off-planet intelligences. And so, yeah, we are, I guess this work that I'm in right now with exoconsciousness is, bottom line, I value human freedom.
Indeed.
And I value spiritual freedom, emotional freedom, mental freedom, psychological freedom, all of those that make us human. I value that freedom. I also believe that humans should have maximum control over their lives. Not minimal control, maximum control over their lives. Now, is there always going to be, issues at play and community and national and global issues at play? Absolutely. But from an individual standpoint, we should have maximum control over our lives. And we should have the freedom to contact, communicate, and co-create and innovate. So for exoconscious humans, this whole innovation, co-creation piece is truly, truly fundamental. So I worked for probably 6 years in Washington, D.C. anyway, with Dr. Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut, Apollo 14 astronaut. And one of the things that we were working on was 0 point energy, consciousness, and then the extraterrestrial presence. Okay. And what I found there in DC and working with Edgar was how much control was placed over anyone bringing forth an innovation. It could be an idea, it could be a thread, even a thread of an idea. It could be an innovation. It could be just the startup of an innovation. But how much control was laid over that entire human creative potential? And after Dr. Mitchell passed away, I just said, that's it. This is what I'm dedicating my life to.
Mm-hmm.
It's opening that potential. So when you join an exoconscious group, you will have a story, you will have a narrative, you will have a contact experience. That's very important for everyone to listen to get to know you, for you to get to know us. And it does not stop there. That's just the first level.
Mm-hmm.
What we really want you to do is live out your mission because you've had this contact. What's it pulling you to in the future? What information are you downloading? What information are you co-creating? That's where we're headed as organic individuals.
I love
Now,
that.
I would say psionics is looking more at what can we put into a cybernetic closed loop system, capture and hope that it becomes creative and conscious.
That's a fundamental difference.
Neither of which has
Absolutely.
happened.
Yeah. Yeah. If that's how it's being set to be used. And it's still a little confusing to me because the people I'm going back to the summit. This is really the first broad, long conversation focused on psionics and how people describe it. I don't remember hearing anybody else describing or even inferring that digital aspect, except this one person who I don't want to harp on. But so I'm wondering if there are people that just have a misconception of what it truly is. Because I mean, look, GPT and other definitions, really GPT. When I asked it, I said, "Do you know what psionics is?" And it said, "Yes, absolutely." Blah 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 blah, and it basically backed up everything you're saying. What can we say? Let me show you another slide. This is an important conversation, you guys, because words where I don't like to put too much stock in labels. Labels have energy. They have a frequency. And if we align with that, it can become more than just a word. It can become the thing itself. Let's look at this slide number 2. Make sure I have that there. So this is a continuing of the conversation. So I said to GPT, I said, so are you saying that the process or application of psionics may in some cases leverage a VUCA model for some military applications? And it said, yes, exactly. Psionics in some cases may be applied within a VUCA framework for military and intelligence purposes. And if you want, I can go into what it said here. Again, I don't know whether you and the audience can see this, so I'll read it. In terms of volatility, psychic abilities like remote viewing or mind influence could be used to adapt quickly in unpredictable high-stakes scenarios. Surveillance and counterintelligence is an example. Uncertainty, psi-based intel gathering through remote viewing, as an example, could be used when conventional intelligence methods are unreliable or compromised. Complexity, psionics may involve layers of perception, mind-machine interfaces, and multidimensional factors requiring careful strategic use. And ambiguity, the military could leverage the confusion or skepticism around psi phenomena to control narratives and keep research classified. Woo! In short, psionics could be a tool within the VUCA model, helping military or intelligence agencies navigate uncertainty and gain a non-local strategic advantage in a chaotic world. Right? What's to say?
It says it. And I want to be careful here because I have utmost respect for the military. I believe that sovereign nations have the right to defend themselves. I believe, just say it, I believe in strong borders. I believe in the right to defend oneself because it's just like in my personal life as a therapist or in my personal life, I believe that I have strong boundaries around certain things that I just don't do, or certain groups or ideas that I don't personally just want to be around. So I have the freedom to set those boundaries. And so I would say that the military is called to a different mission. definitely called to a different mission, which I have a high respect for, and are dealing with forces that they deal with, so I don't have to deal with. So I don't want to come off as though I'm anti-military. I'm certainly not
Right.
anti-military,
Yeah.
nor am I anti-intelligence. However, I do believe that intelligence, as in the CIA intelligence, belongs off sovereign grounds. If you want to go use, I mean, it's always been part of the military. I mean, from the very beginning, there's always been an intelligence. Actually, biblically, if you look back at the Bible, when I don't remember exactly who, but going into battle, where did the Old Testament leader go to? He went to Delphi. He went to ask the psychic what was happening, and so of course, military is going to use psychics. Of course, intel is going to use psychics.
Right.
So my concern more is natural human consciousness, my abilities that have freedom to advance. So my concern with, my book, Exoconscious Humans, Will Free Will Survive in an increasingly non-human world? I wrote that book juxtaposing transhumanism and exoconscious humans. And how they were different, but where they did share common grounds. And they do share common grounds, but they're also extremely different.
Yeah.
And that there can be an open pathway for both. If someone wants to go the timeline of transhumanism, mystery schools have talked about this. Rudolf Steiner, many people have, Blavatsky have talked about transhumanism, where it's headed. This is really nothing new in the world of mystery schools. That's just a choice. I just don't choose that. I choose to have my work be led more to the beings to which I wish to communicate, the beings to which I wish to co-create with. And I'm the deciding factor. I, as an exoconscious human, am the deciding factor. I'm not an ET. I know there's a lot of people in our community. I'm an ET. That's fine. You can be an ET. I'm a human. And I'm advancing as an exoconscious human in cosmic consciousness. And I think that a lot of what we're seeing right now is that we're in such a pivotal point. And I think when we look back 5 years from now, Alexis, I think you and I will be looking at, we're at a pivotal point that humanity stands on this significant threshold, that there's going to be advances in space exploration and interspecies communication. That's just going to happen. And humans are going to do it. Humans, not just computers.
Right.
I don't think ETs particularly want to talk to computers, quite frankly. I don't think ETs,
depending on which ones.
Yeah, depending on which ones. And even if they did, they would go like, what is this? A 4th generation computer? I mean, it doesn't have the breadth and the subtlety and the depth and the creativity of human consciousness, period.
Wow. There's a question here that there's so many different things. I had a question that kind of, see if I can recall, in terms of this again brings up the idea of what species are we referring to? Could there in fact be a species or a group of species, perhaps many, that are predicated on an AI model that are themselves synthetics? Obviously, the grays, or some aspects of the gray species, have been looked at as in fact robotic themselves. Well, we don't know. We can't say for sure. But,
well, I think we can. I think, actually, Alexa, I think that you and I, if we're around something that's robotic, that we as humans know it.
You recognize it, of course.
Yeah, we feel that frequency. It's not a mystery to us. That's why people that have said, well, no, the grays are robotic. I mean, they sense that.
That's true. Good point.
And so I think it's kind of like, a lot of this is making, so we go back to VUCA, a lot of this is making something complex that isn't. So humans have a natural innate ability to know when something's synthetic and know when something's natural. It's just like ketamine right now. Ketamine is a huge drug right now, right? Huge use for healing. Well, people Ketamine is a synthetic drug. There's no way around. Yeah, it's a synthetic. Ayahuasca, different situation.
Mm-hmm.
The frequency and vibration of those, and I'm not an advocate for the use of psychedelics at all. I'm just using this as an example.
Comparison,
People
right.
know ketamine is synthetic, ayahuasca is natural.
This brings up a question. When you say people know, I'll just throw this out there. With this march toward transhumanism and the sort of closed loop framework that many are operating, I believe, in right now, when you say people know, some people know, but my fear is that others who have been so indoctrinated into this AI world the lines will blur in terms of their being able to discern what's synthetic and what isn't.
I totally agree with that. And that now you're getting into really the second, the second Substack that I wrote on psionics, because you're moving into. So one of the things to go back. So we're going to backtrack back into Tavistock. So one of the main findings of Tavistock was by John Bowlby, and he was the one that really taught us about attachment theory. Now, if you go study psychology today, you're not going to learn about attachment theory because it's so good. It's so good. And it really explains, I use it all the time in my therapy. It really explains how humans attach and why they attach. So if you have a child, for example, we have a child and they're spending hours a day on a video game and they're living days of their lives in an artificial reality. Okay. By doing that, they are avoidant. So they have an avoidant attachment to real life, to nature, to their family, even to their friends, maybe to their school. When you engender this avoidant attachment through video games, yeah, that person's going to want to be a transhuman.
Oh, I think that's evident right now.
So it's all attachments.
Yeah, absolutely. The training has been happening for a long, long time.
And it's interesting. So my second Substack, I also read about the personality. So now what do we see especially on X? There's always this personalities fight. Like he didn't show my, Schellenberger took, Grosh is like, Schellenberger took all my information and I don't like what this person said about me. And that person is not right. So it's drama. It's UFO, UAP task force, intelligent military intel men having a mean girl fight.
I know where you're going with that.
And it's totally about people like drama. So the people that attach to drama are going to attach to the mean boy fights. Yeah. Like my tattoo is bigger than yours.
Always have. That's just a fundamental.
And so, I mean, it's just, it's just attachment theory. It's just people, it's easier to attach to drama or attach to avoidance in video games than it is to ground yourself and live a natural human life.
Right.
It's easier to do the former.
Yeah. And yet, as we are on the precipice, I've been saying this for years, and I hope one day we truly will be. I think we are. We're reaching a crescendo.
Yes.
A paradigm shift, the possibilities of interacting with and maybe eventually joining an intergalactic community are closer than ever. And what I see as an upside to that is that the attachment theory that you speak of may, with that, fall away as we mature in our interaction with greater intelligence and greater wisdom and spiritually focused beings.
We put together, we decided to come together as a community, and we were looking at how exoconscious humans are going to guide where we're going into space. And we came together as a small group, and we launched, we're launching that planetary constitution that talks about how natural human consciousness, natural humans that are contactees, the rights and responsibilities of us as humans in this world is space that we're advancing into. and
That's
it's very,
fantastic.
it's a very well done. I'll share it with you when it comes out. We just put
Absolutely.
in a video together with it, but it's on our website, exoconscioushumans.com.
You're doing so much. Well, on that note, we're gonna go next door, you guys. We're gonna continue this conversation in the after show, but in the interim, I would like to have Rebecca let us know where we can find more of exoconsciousness and all the work you're doing.
Okay, great. We have my main website is exoconsciousness.com. Our community website for the Institute for Exoconsciousness is exoconscioushumans.com, and we have a YouTube channel, Exoconscious Humans. My Substack is Rebecca Hardcastle Wright at Substack, and we also offer webinars, and we have monthly coaching. If you want to join our monthly coaching, we always talk about a very, very intriguing topic and share our approach to it as experiencers. You can join the monthly coaching with just our Substack's free, but if you want to pay $8 a month, you can join our monthly coaching and
Great.
get the recording. Or so we really revolve around an interactive coaching model of really listening and empowering each other.
That is great. So active. I see your Substacks come through and all sorts of news that you're putting out, and I'm always cheering you
Thank
on.
you.
So that's kudos to you. Listen, I have to give a shout out to our mutual friend and colleague, Susan Manowitz. She speaks so highly of you, and we just spoke the other day, and
She's
she
on
could
the
have.
forefront of this for
Oh, I
sure.
was just going to say she could have easily been a part of this conversation. We just
Yeah.
had Susan on about maybe a month and a half, maybe 2 months ago.
Oh, I
So
love that. Yeah, she
shout
was
out
part of
to
our
Susan.
she was part of our planetary constitution group
Oh yeah, I
that
think
wrote
she
that
told
and
me that.
yeah, wrote that and put it together. But I mean, her whole the work she's doing with what's happening with the sun and with the
Yes.
geomagnetics and how that's opening consciousness. That is such a critical piece. I mean, that's part of why
Absolutely.
we're at this whole juncture that's why we're there. It's pivotal time with humanity.
It
That's
sure is.
preparing us to,
Ooh.
communicate with these um, other species, interspecies communication.
Let's go next door and talk about that a little bit more. Let's get into the crux of that, absent of psionics per se, but just, the core of what this is alleged to be about, psionics, but what exoconsciousness it's definitely about. Bottom line is, how do we get into a mutually beneficial? I always have believed that there's a symbiosis that exists with contact encounters, but if we can consciously bring in these groups for the right reasons, to learn, to engage, to understand, to empathize, how would we do that? Can we talk about that a little bit over on the after
Mhm.
show?
Sure.
Okay, let's do it. Okay, so for now, I'm going to say thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Rebecca Hardcastle
Thank you.
Wright, for being our guest. I know it's not going to be your last time here, and I'm so glad to finally have you on. So
Oh,
thanks so
thank you.
much. And as always, we thank our audience for joining us for another episode of Higher Journeys. We'll talk to you real soon. Bye.